Before we begin, I invite you to gently close your ears and focus on what remains when all external sounds fade away. It's like sitting in a quiet room, and after a while, you notice a subtle ringing or hum beneath the silence. If you listen closely, you'll start to experience this soft, constant presence, something that feels like the very fabric of reality itself. In quantum physics, it's said that everything is connected at the most fundamental level, and that everything we see is just a manifestation of deeper, unseen energy. What you are hearing, or rather feeling, is that same energy, that same field of potential. This subtle ringing is what we call the sound of silence. It's not just an abstract concept or some external force. It's the very essence of you. Everything we discuss in this session, and the ones to come, will be about this sound of silence. It is not something separate or different from you. It is you. This exploration is about realizing that the sound of silence is your own inner being, your most fundamental nature, the stillness from which all life arises. You are that, the very presence behind everything. In my life, I've realized that whenever I find myself in situations where things go either very well or very poorly, it often stems from the fact that I've set too many expectations. Expectations from things, expectations from people, and sometimes even expectations from circumstances. When I expect too much from something or someone and those expectations aren't met, that's when things go wrong. I've come to see that I actually enjoy reflecting on these moments, doing a bit of introspection and trying to figure out where things went off course. I start to recognize that the moment I understand the foundation of my expectations, I can begin to shift my perspective. It's almost like a pattern. When I stop expecting things to go a certain way, everything falls into place naturally. But even with this understanding, this practice of letting go doesn't always happen on a consistent basis. It happens intermittently, coming and going as life throws new situations at me. This is a constant process of learning, of reminding myself not to expect and to be present in the moment. However, just because I've realized that expectations can lead to frustration, it doesn't mean I'm able to remove them completely from my life. As you can imagine, this realization alone doesn't make the expectations disappear. I've learned that as long as I exist, as long as I interact with other people and live in this world, expectations will continue to form, whether I want them to or not. This is where detachment comes into play. People often tell me to detach myself from my expectations, but I don't think many truly understand what that means. Detaching doesn't mean that my expectations will suddenly vanish into thin air. They won't, because they are a fundamental part of being human. The conflict that arises when I try to eliminate all expectations is that I end up creating a new expectation, the expectation to have no expectations. This in itself is a contradiction. It's like telling myself not to feel thirsty, trying to avoid the very thing that's natural. I've come to understand this more deeply as I reflect on my experiences. The truth is, I have expectations. I have expectations from myself, from the people around me, and from the world. It's not just me. Everyone has expectations, and that's completely normal. There's nothing inherently wrong with having expectations. The real issue arises when I start to believe that I shouldn't have any expectations at all. When I begin to think this way, I create an internal struggle that feels impossible to resolve. It's as if I'm trying to achieve something that is next to impossible. As long as I'm alive, as long as I'm interacting with other people, I will continue to have expectations, no matter how much I try to detach from them. Take relationships, for example. Whether it's with friends, family, or colleagues, there will always be some level of expectation involved. Even something as simple as expecting someone to speak kindly to me or to not smoke in front of me while we're sitting together. These are everyday expectations. There's nothing wrong with them. But if I were to expect myself to have no expectations at all, I'd be setting myself up for failure. Expecting to have no expectations is like asking a computer to be formatted and completely erase its memory. While it might be technically possible, it would turn me into a blank slate, a shell of my former self. I would lose everything that makes me who I am, all my memories, experiences, and knowledge. It's an extreme analogy, but it illustrates the point. Even science, with all its advancements, can't make me forget my expectations without fundamentally changing who I am. If I were to somehow erase my expectations entirely, I would have to relearn everything from scratch: how to walk, how to talk, how to interact with people. That's because expectations are embedded in our memories, in our very way of being. So the idea of completely eliminating expectations is not only unrealistic, but also undesirable. Instead of trying to rid myself of expectations, I've learned that the key is to change how I relate to them. The moment I stop expecting myself to have no expectations, I start to feel more at peace. It's normal for expectations to come and go. Sometimes they'll be there, sometimes they won't. When they're present, they might cause problems, but when they're absent, everything feels easier. This cycle is part of life, and understanding it helps me cope better. It's similar to how the body experiences pain and illness. There will be times when I feel unwell and other times when I feel perfectly fine. Expecting to have a body that never experiences any discomfort or illness is unrealistic. It's like expecting to live in a world where there is only day and no night. The natural rhythm of life involves both pleasure and pain, light and darkness, health and sickness. And just as I can't control the rising and setting of the sun, I can't control the fact that I will have expectations. What I can control, however, is how I respond to them. Instead of fighting against the inevitable, I've learned to adjust my thinking to align with reality. This isn't about passively accepting things as they are, but about recognizing that my expectations are a part of the larger flow of life. Once I understand this, everything starts to make sense. I accept that I have expectations, and that it's okay to have them. This acceptance brings a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced before. I stop reacting so strongly to my expectations, and as a result, they begin to lose their power over me. The real challenge is when I start to react to my own expectations, telling myself that I shouldn't have them. This creates a loop of frustration. The more I tell myself not to expect, the more I find myself expecting something, and then I get angry at myself for having those expectations in the first place. It's a vicious cycle. It's like trying to tell myself not to feel thirsty. The more I think about it, the more I become aware of my thirst. The solution is to accept that expectations are natural and normal. Once I embrace this truth, the intensity of my expectations diminishes significantly. The internal battle that used to rage within me starts to fade away, and the fear of having expectations disappears. It's almost like an allergic reaction. The more I fear it, the more sensitive I become to even the slightest sensation. If my body feels a twinge of discomfort, I immediately start to worry, thinking that something is wrong. But often these sensations are just that, sensations. They don't necessarily mean that there's a real problem. By overanalyzing and worrying about them, I amplify their impact, making things worse than they actually are. But when I accept these sensations for what they are, without adding unnecessary layers of meaning, they lose their power over me. I've learned to observe these feelings without letting them trigger anxiety or fear. The same principle applies to expectations. When I accept them for what they are, they no longer cause me distress. I find peace in the understanding that expectations are a normal part of life. As soon as I stop resisting them, I stop fighting against the natural flow of things, and I experience a sense of calm that I didn't have before. The cycle of frustration breaks, and I'm able to live with my expectations without letting them control me.